please, can I invite our panel guests up here? And while you grab a seat, I'm going to introduce you all. Cam Nicholson. Cam's a partner at Nicon Rural Services, based near Geelong. And what he doesn't know about mixed farming isn't worth knowing. Cam provides advice to farmers. He lectures on animal and pasture systems at Marcus Oldham, delivers programs and projects across southern Australia whilst also running a 400-hectare beef and sheep farm. We've got Olivia Lawson in the middle. Welcome, Olivia. Olivia runs Paringa Livestock Genetics in Central Vic with her husband, Tom. She works in marketing, business, on-farm project management and contract clients, and together she and Tom won the Coles Weekly Times Beef Farmer of the Year in 2020. Congratulations. Our last panel member is Jess Loughland from Greenham. Jess is the livestock supply chain manager for Greenham and who operate 3 export beef plants across Vic and Tas. Jess looks after Greenham's natural beef programs, producer engagement, digital systems and the company's supply chain sustainability initiatives. Lastly, but very much not least, is Leanne Sherriff. Leanne is a team leader at Pinion Advisory based in Tassie, near the Western Tiers I've got written here, from my experience with you. Leanne's got really strong technical skills in natural resource management, sheep production systems, extension and training, and wrangling people like me and Ben to reply to our emails. Thanks to you and to the team for bringing such a great panel together, and I'll hand over to you to get started. Can we give them a big welcome, please?
Thanks very much, Meg. She's very tall, isn't she? Okay. Let's see if I can learn how to drive this. Yes, yay. Okay, so yeah, as Meg said, my name's Leanne Sherriff. I'm a team leader with Pinion Advisory. And I'm super excited to be facilitating the panel this afternoon. Sarah kind of highlighted this morning some MLA's great work in this space, and also the interest of the retail and processing sector in low carbon or carbon neutral beef and other products. And there's also, going alongside that, really strong promotion of the opportunities for producers to have an additional income stream from carbon through carbon trading. And so most producers are feeling a little bit confused and uncertain, and they're going to need to make some sort of a choice about how they engage in the carbon space at some point. They can't double count, basically, so they can't sell all their carbon and then want to use it to offset their own farm emissions. So they need to understand what the space has for them and what they can do with their carbon. So we've got a fantastic panel here today. They're really well informed in this space and really experienced and also independent. I know that Claudia said this morning it's good to have a carbon panel where no one's trying to sell you anything. Everyone's here with an objective view of the world and covering with Jess the supply chain right through to the producer and the advisor perspective. So they're going to help us unpack how we can help producers go about deciding on the best pathway for them in the carbon space and what you as advisors could know or be able to do to support them in that. So I'll just give you a bit of an overview of how we'll run the session. So basically we'll start with each of our panellists providing a brief introduction to themselves and their carbon experience. And then I've got a few questions I'm going to put to them, similar to Sarah did with our bursary recipients this morning. And as they share their experiences and thoughts and help to unpack this question a little more, just write down your questions, save them, and we'll have an opportunity for you guys to throw questions to them at the end. And finally, we'll just wrap up with a quick, snappy take-home from each of them. And what's the key thing you need to leave the room thinking of in the carbon space? So before I introduce the panellists, though, I just wanted to give a quick overview from MLA's point of view, which I can really skip through because Sarah did a fantastic job this morning of covering this. But basically, MLA are really leading the charge on behalf of industry in this space of achieving carbon neutrality by 2030. They have, as Sarah said, been investing $150 million in R&D across those 4 pillars. And they're also, as you heard, really committed to the extension and adoption and developing tools and resources for producers, and also increasing the awareness of industry and the ability of the advisory sector as well through sessions like this Livestock Advisor Updates Forum. And this slide here just sort of highlights that the way that, I guess, the red meat industry is really leading agriculture with the CN30 commitment, and this indicates that since 2005 there's been a decrease of 59% in the greenhouse gas emissions. And although many people in this room will be aware that a large part of that is due to changes in land management and in vegetation clearing laws, and it does mean that the next 41% to get there is going to be a bit of hard work, but with all of that investment in R&D, and I think the way that the industry has embraced this target, that the future's looking pretty bright, and so we're very excited to get stuck into the panel session. So first up, I'd like to welcome Jess to introduce herself and give us a bit of an understanding of her, I guess, her background and her exposure and experience in the carbon space.
Yeah, thanks, Leanne. So as she said, my name's Jess Loughland. I work with Greenham, based here in Melbourne. In my role, I'm largely looking after our on-farm programs, not just as they are today, but then how we really future-proof them and continue to deliver on what our customers are looking for. So I probably spend half my time on the customer side, talking directly with our customer base of, what is it, what do you need now and into the future? Are there particular claims you want to be able to make around environmental sustainability, and where do you see that this sort of fits in the puzzle? And then working both with our producer base and consultants like Pinion and scientific advisors to guide us in how we can actually translate that to what we do on farm. So quite lucky in that I get that sort of varied exposure. But until I joined Greenham about 18 months ago, my knowledge in this space in particular was fairly limited. So it's been a very steep learning curve for me over the last 18 months. I'd been more around the sort of grass-fed or eating quality space previously, as opposed to in the carbon. And I guess in trying to wrap my head around it, I've realised just how complex this is, and definitely evolved my own opinions in this space dramatically. But yeah, probably really just trying to understand how we can get things back to simple messages for our own supply base so that they can start making some informed decisions in this space and really just know where to start.
Thank you, Jess, and that probably resonates a lot with the people in the room as well. I know there's a lot on steep learning curves in the carbon area. Olivia.
Technical difficulty.
We've got some slides up behind us with Olivia's part.
Excellent. Hi, I'm Olivia. So I'm here as a producer representative, definitely not as a carbon expert by any stretch, but just to share our experiences on farm. So my husband and I run a beef breeding bull business in central Victoria, where we breed Angus and stabilisers, which is a 4-way composite, and do some custom breeding for pastoral companies in the north. Our experience with carbon, and it probably wasn't really carbon, we called it biological farming systems. We made a conscious switch about 16 years ago, after undergoing a succession plan. Went out on our own and made a conscious switch after there was some local, regional workshops and farm information days on the benefits of biological farming. So we made a conscious switch then to eliminate synthetic fertilisers, mob up all of our cattle into larger mobs and really focus on our grazing. That's it in a nutshell. We also made a whole lot of other decisions to support that. But my husband and I both did ag science at uni. He went to Lincoln in New Zealand, where he focused on grazing, and then went into UC Davis in the States and focused on animal breeding. So he's got a pretty good mind when it comes to grazing and breeding, which is a good combination. I did ag science, but then focused on the wool industry and marketing, so had a crash course in beef genetics and grazing when I met Tom. In recent times, I've been involved with the MLA Carbon Accounting Pilot, the Environmental Credentials Project platform that they're working on, And at the moment, we're about to embark on the Victorian on-farm emissions pilot program. And I think I've missed a whole lot of stuff there, but we'll get to that later.
That's awesome. Thanks, Olivia. And last but by no means least is Cam. So, yeah, Cam's been working in this space for a number of years and is pretty well the go-to person. And I think it's worth highlighting that, in case you don't mention, I'm going to, Cam, that he actually teaches Marcus Oldham ag science students about carbon. So he's very good at conveying the messages and understanding the technical knowledge.
Thanks, Leanne. Yeah, I've been involved in advisory stuff for 35 plus years. I say that rather than 40 because I'm getting closer to 40, 35 plus sounds nicer. Got involved in the carbon trading side of it in 2012 for the first time. Looking at opportunities with the clients that I work with about, gee, we can make all this money out of carbon and we're going to play merry hell and it's just going to be our new income stream. And I thought we'd do the same thing on our own farm as well. And a decade later, I haven't signed up a client yet. And we haven't done it on our own place either. Having said that, there is opportunity in understanding this carbon thing and getting it right, but the key message is to get it right and understand where it fits in the business, because I'd be getting 2 phone calls a week at the moment around this stuff, and I reckon the majority of them are people that have said, what the hell have I done? Because they've signed up for something and now realising what the impact of it is. So opportunity there, but just understand what's behind it and make sure you're giving advice that's sound for the business.
Awesome. Thanks, Cam. Okay, so getting into our questions. So our first question is, as we've talked about, there's a huge amount of talk and hype and excitement about these opportunities to make money from carbon. But I just wanted to unpack the panellists' thoughts and is that the right place that producers should be starting? So if we can start off with Jess, if the mic will work.
Yes, sure. Did you have a slide?
I sure do.
All right, excellent, thank you. So apologies for the brain dump. I'm going to have to look this way a little bit because this is a very, very complex space with a lot of different factors. So I guess I just wanted to sort of start when it comes to making money. You know, you'll have seen products starting to come out or have been around for a few years where, you know, they're making carbon neutral or low carbon marketing claims. And there is definitely an opportunity there. I think, though, what we'll find is that ability to market a product as carbon neutral or really drive premiums in the marketplace on that may be more of a short-term thing. And the reason that I say that is because, particularly around global policy, we're seeing some really, really big developments happen in that space. So a couple of examples I'll just give are both Japan and New Zealand for 2 reasons. So Japan being a big market for Australian beef, they've set a goal of carbon neutral 2050. And while there may not be huge consumer-driven, purchase drivers out there saying we want to buy a low-carbon product, their government's really said, well, this is the goal that we want our country to have, and they're pushing onto corporates to say, you need to start looking at your footprint, tell us what you're going to do about it, how you're going to get your footprint down, and that includes what they're actually buying in, so their Scope 3 emissions, the beef in this case that they're buying from Australia or any other country, how are you demonstrating that footprint is as low as possible or moving towards neutral? So in terms of that market access space there in Japan or maintaining preferential trade access there, it's a really big one to think about. When we look over to a country like New Zealand, their agriculture makes up about 49% of their total emissions. So they don't have what we have here in Australia in terms of things like the big mining impact, which is driving a much higher percent of our emissions. What that means in New Zealand is that it's a really big focus for their government in how they reduce their footprint, is putting things in place for agriculture. So they've initiated a whole bunch of things with their farming sector where they actually are having to complete their carbon accounts and start to identify strategies over the next few years. And these are all quite short-term goals. In terms of the natural beef space that our company in particular plays in, they're also competing in that space. So when customers are coming to us and saying, hey, what's your carbon footprint? Do you know it? Or can you demonstrate, how far you are away from neutral? We're competing with other countries where this is becoming, a necessity for their farmers. So while it may be seen as a bit of a nuisance over there, it does impact how we compete in the marketplace. That's not all bad things at all, and I guess in Australia we've got our industry goal of 2030, but I do think that when we do take a step back from that individual property level carbon footprint, we've really got to think about how Australia and Australian beef or red meat plays in this space, and what is it that we want to be able to achieve long term. And if we want to maintain really high prices for our product, we need to continue to exceed consumer expectations in this space. So I guess from our perspective, I've come from going, carbon trading, not so harmless, to sort of going, well, hang on, let's just make sure that we all understand where this fits in our scheme of things, particularly if credits are being sold outside the country or outside of the industry or the supply chain, because as Leanne mentioned, carbon credits can't be counted twice, and so the property or the industry may actually struggle to achieve neutrality if we've sold off all our credits to other industries and given them a leg up in this space.
Great, thanks Jess. Olivia, your thoughts?
So my thoughts from a different perspective, perhaps being a producer, and we've been considering diving in ourselves into an ERF project. I'm also from the productivity benefits of looking at soil carbon. So there seems to be a lot of upside in terms of profitability gains and climate change impact mitigation with increasing your levels of soil carbon, including water retention and maintaining ground cover, which then reduces your risk of erosion, improving productivity and also biodiversity. So I suppose it all fits into one package in terms of on-farm benefits for us in terms of lifting soil carbon levels and sequestration through our rotational grazing and our stocking rate as high as we can as seed stock producers. It comes with its challenges, as Basil mentioned earlier. But I suppose we'll keep a close eye on the carbon market space. I think a lot of the talk and hype has been around the carbon market space for producers, and there's been field days and all sorts of aggregators. I think there's now 100 carbon aggregators who are out there wanting to sign up farmers. They're everywhere. But I suppose from our perspective, we want to be a bit cautious in that if we do get involved in a carbon project, for us, we would be interested in using it as an inset process to create a carbon neutral on-farm business for ourselves, or if we had excess credits to keep them within the supply chain and perhaps help someone like Greenham's offset their emissions. So I think keeping it in the supply chain is important for us, rather than helping out someone who's a fossil fuel company or an energy company.
Thank you. And finally, Cam.
Yeah, I think about this stuff and talk to clients about it at 3 levels. The first level, and I think, you've got it up there. Can I stand up?
Yeah.
Easier to trying to turn around and talk them a slide. Talk about it at 3 levels. Oh, well, that does that fancy round thing, doesn't it? Yeah, all right, I'll give that a whirl. Talk about it at 3 levels. One level is what I call the emissions intensity level. And I'll come back to this, but I reckon this is a really safe place to start, because emissions intensity is nothing about sucking up carbon, storing carbon, trading carbon, doing anything else. What emissions intensity is about is that you produce X amount of produce, how many emissions do you create in producing that product? This is our farm at home, and you can see I've gone back to 2000 and... Oh, I knew I'd bugger this up. Oh, there we go. Oh, you've got to hold it down for a bit. Okay, goes back to 2006-07. All this is the beef produced off our farm in kilograms of live weight each year. And you can see, which is the orangey brown line there, that over the last, 15 years, it's gone up. Basically, we've been more productive, and that's more productive per hectare, but also getting a bit bigger with some land that we've leased as well. The blue line, though, is the one that I want to talk about. So that's a production one. And I'd say to you, if none of your clients can do the orangey brown line, which is you need for things like cost of production and stuff like that, don't worry about carbon emissions. If you don't know your cost of production, you don't know how much stuff you're producing in a year, this is next level. So get that orange line right first. You get that orange line right first, then getting the blue line's really easy, because there are simple calculators to be able to work out if you've run X many animals to create this, how many kilograms of CO2 equivalent have they produced? Okay. The reason why that blue line is going down is because we got more efficient. Okay, for every kilo of beef that we produce, we can do that more efficiently, producing less carbon as a result. How do we do that? Combination of about 6 or 8 things. We grow more feed, we utilise it better, our animal health is better, our genetics are better. All of the things you heard this morning is what's driving that blue line down. That's pretty safe. You're not trading carbon, you're not signing up for contracts, you're just doing a better job. Okay? And I reckon your starting point, if you could get your clients to draw graphs like that, then I reckon that's a really safe starting point. And we've got good benchmarks. We know from some studies that between 10 and 12 kilos of beef is pretty good. 10's an excellent end, 12's a pretty common end of what we can get out of the beef industry. So I've even got some benchmarks there for us to look at that. And it'll tell you where you've got some opportunities in that business. Second level then is what I'd call the carbon neutral stuff. The challenge with the carbon neutral stuff is you've also got to put sequestration into it. So it's this, which is your emissions, minus whatever you're sequestering or storing. And the 2 main places we're storing that is if it's on farm, in soil or in trees, in vegetation. If it's off farm, and Basil will talk about this, we can go carbon neutral tomorrow. We just go and buy them from an Indian wind farm, you know, and you get your emissions offset that way. And you can say you can claim you're carbon neutral, as some beef businesses are. They're going exactly that way. Okay, but that one involves being able to calculate what you're sequestering, and what we're sequestering has got some hairs on it, to put it bluntly. Okay, the way we calculate what you store in trees, what we store in soils, and all these magic potions and stuff and different offers of how we can change our soil carbon by X or Y, sometimes challenge what's the known science around that. And then there's that second one, that one about the trying to get carbon neutral, then it comes back to your business and whether you think you want to capture that sequestration that you're doing to use to offset against your own business, as opposed to what I'd call the third level, which is then, hey, we've stored some carbon on our farm, we'll go and sell that to someone else. The real risk that's emerging now is that, and Jess sort of alluded to this, lots of businesses, lots of further down the supply chain are saying we want something that's of lower emissions intensity or no emissions. And if you've sold them to someone else, you can't then use them yourself. In fact, if you sell them to someone else, you've got to manage them for someone else for the next 25 years minimum, up to the next 100 years. And they've got to stay there, be audited, and you can't use them on your own farm. So I think that's a much more risky level to go to. So, summarise, Leanne, stick at this one to start with. I reckon it's a really safe... Have I? I've got another slide. No, I haven't.
Getting ahead of myself. And so, yeah, that brings us into our next question, which is... what are some examples of on-farm actions that each of you have either seen work or, in Olivia's case, experienced, or also, as Cam said, he's been putting this into practice on his own place as well, that have achieved both production improvements and reducing carbon emissions? So, Cam, we'll start off with you.
I've probably touched on it. I probably spoke too long because I jumped to that next question as well. But yeah, in our mind, it's about being efficient in your production system, and there's lots of opportunity there. We've heard a heap of it this morning. You know? And the second one, I think, from an overall sustainability point of view, if you can then do better things for your soil, which is what Olivia touched on, but also vegetation, which has got things related to animal welfare stuff, whether it's shelter, shade, whatever it might be. So improving your soils, improving your landscape, it's going to pick up some of these other, what you might call environmental credentials that I think we're going to need as well. Carbon's only going to be one of them going forward. And so I think there are lots of practices you can stick on farm that'll work well.
Yep, awesome. Olivia, have you got a story to tell in this place?
Yeah, I've got a little bit more to add, I suppose. Just our sort of journey over the years and observations for the last sort of 15 years. So through the grazing management and planned rotations with larger mobs, it's enabled us to actually increase our productivity, despite the fact we've eliminated any applications of synthetic fertilisers. We've gone down the path of also getting our soils tested through independent labs. That's something I would encourage people to do, rather than using large companies who have a vested interest in telling you what sort of soil results you should be seeing, which might indicate what fertilisers the producers should be buying. So that was sort of one change. And I guess from a production perspective, it can be a change in mindset for a lot of people. So for us, it's not just carbon, and Cam alluded to it as well. It's animal welfare and biodiversity and landscape and ecosystem health, and that now is all being wrapped up. We can see that in the international markets, and demand from our customers it's actually the whole piece of sustainability. So carbon's just one part of that. And I see the government recently announced a biodiversity program plan legislation. I haven't actually had time to read that yet. And the previous government also had a carbon and biodiversity pilot that was wrapped up in one. There's a lot going on, but I guess at the end of the day, the more that producers can do on farm anyway, that may not be tied necessarily to a market, I still think there'll be benefit and gain in the future in terms of market access and potentially premiums for their beef, and I presume lamb as well. That's not my industry. I think that, the story's there in what is achievable, and often there's not many barriers to make that change. It's just really, instead of being extractive, as Basil pointed out this morning, it's being more regenerative, and I guess that's where the terms come from. We see it as a holistic view of the plants, animals and people relationships between all three, and that sort of ties in with our sort of sustainability ethos. So for us, it's more than just the carbon. The increase in soil carbon does obviously bring those benefits like drought resilience and water retention and reduced erosion, and often also availability of nutrients through different diversity in pastures. So we focus on diversity in terms of number of species. We also do some short-term pastoral cropping now, using up to 12 different species in the one mix, and underplanted with some perennials as well. That seems to be working really well for us for a feed gap, particularly for our weaners in sort of late summer and autumn. And that's pretty exciting. We haven't done any measurements on the soil carbon through the multi-species pasture cropping, but we're seeing the benefits in terms of productivity.
Awesome. And do you have any soil carbon measurements from the areas that you've been working on over the last 15 years? Have you been monitoring those?
We've actually been really slack in terms of observations, and it goes against our science background. But we did have initial testing done over the first year and I think year 5, and there was a 2 or 3% increase in the soil carbon levels back then. That was 10 years ago. So I suspect now it's going to be a lot higher. But we've just actually participated in a national soil monitoring project through Southern Cross University. So we've just done really comprehensive soil testing across the farms. So I'm really looking forward to getting the results back and just seeing how they compared from those ones we did quite a long time ago.
Interesting. And finally, Jess, from the supply chain point of view.
Thanks, Leanne. I guess, back to sort of what Cam was showing on that graph around, reducing emissions intensity. One, I guess, both from a supply chain perspective and also our company has a few thousand acres in Tassie where we're mostly buying in cattle to finish off, so only running a small number of breeders. And the biggest one that we've really been looking at is just how we optimise that animal health to get that, improved productivity. So that's driving down our emissions intensity, but then also those healthier animals, are improving our welfare outcomes, which is a huge part of, our business and how we, market our product, and is absolutely wrapped up in anything around sustainability from our customer base, but then also, has the potential to improve our eating quality outcomes. So all of these things are so interrelated that, it's not just about the extra weight gain on that animal and the emissions reduction, but the dollar per kilo return at the end of the day can be higher because it's getting a better eating quality outcome. So we're getting far greater returns on, the same animal while driving down carbon footprint. And, from a property perspective, in Tassie, it's been around having, really strong induction processes for cattle coming onto the property, so making sure that they're identifying what those animals need, they're getting pre-treatment for any disease. They've done a lot of testing to identify any nutrient gaps for those animals, so they're getting the supplements they require, and they've been doing a lot to make sure those animals have a clean water source. And, just once again, like those things are having a marked improvement on our weight gains and the health of the animals coming through.
Awesome, thank you. And now we want to sort of flip that around. So we've been hearing a lot about the positives and the benefits of carbon, but there are some risks associated as well. And so I guess we just wondered if you could unpack some of the key risks that you see for producers to be aware of in the carbon space, and I guess things that this audience might want to be aware of as well to guide their clients through. So Jess, we're going to start with you. You've got the microphone.
Sure. I guess we've already touched on some of those risks tied up with, I suppose, acting too fast to sell away carbon. I guess, though, one thing I'm becoming increasingly aware of is that, market demand in this space and desire for, sustainable products is moving a lot faster potentially than a lot of the science to back up some of the claims. And that comes back to, products being sold and everything else. So I think a few times a week I have some company call me and tell me how their magical product is going to solve all the problems for our supply chain and either improve carbon sequestration or magically make the animals grade better or have no emissions. And I guess I just, encourage you to have your clients stop and question anything that comes their way in this space at the moment, making sure it's coming from a trusted source or that you can seek and verify a lot of those claims, what research has been done and what outcomes there actually are, and do a real cost benefit, because even when it comes down to things like feed supplements to reduce emissions, a lot of the work's still being done in making those available and effective in a pasture environment. And yet we have quite a lot of companies pushing supplements into our grass-fed production systems, and we're going, well, hang on, the sums don't add up for us just yet. Even if we make these supplements available to animals for the last 3 months of their life, and they do have the same impacts that we see in an intensive feed environment like a feedlot, that's only equating to maybe a whole of life reduction of 12% methane emissions, as opposed to, the 70 to 90% for the time fed. So that in itself is not enough to make a marketing claim. It might be part of a whole emissions reduction package, but we can't solely make a marketing claim off that, and yet it's incurring a huge expense. So I guess fitness for purpose of a lot of products and supplements too does really need to be questioned.
Great, thanks. Olivia, your thoughts? What are the key risks I guess you've experienced in your own changes to your system, but also I guess from external pressures?
Yeah, sure. We touched earlier a bit about buyer beware, for producers just to be, cautious if they're approached or go down the path of wanting to sign up for an ERF project. I mean, there are bound to be some good stories. I think this sustainability and carbon space has been accelerated a lot in the last 3 years, and we probably won't see the benefit of, those producers may not see the benefit of their soil carbon market results, dividends for, a number of years. It's not a short-term fix. But saying that, I guess for us in terms of I'll start again. With an ERF project, really the upside for producers is if you've got very low levels of productivity, and it's all about signing up. The benefits seem to be signing up when you've got pretty basic or rundown country, and the upside is all the work that you do after that in terms of lifting your soil carbon. So a lot of the carbon projects are designed to help I would say those producers who are not best practice, and it's kind of rewarding them, but in a way it's good because it will hopefully lift their on-farm practice management, so that's, I guess, a good thing. For producers like ourselves who've been farming biologically for 15 years, I'd imagine that if we did get our soil, the 1 metre cores done, that there's not going to be a lot, potentially more upside. I think once you get to 7 or 8%, is that right, in soil carbon, there's not much further you can really go.
Yeah, it depends on the soil type.
Yeah. So that's sort of a challenge that I see for people who are already, like us, well down the path in terms of a potential challenge. And I guess one of our other challenges is the stocking rate. If you are a seed stock herd, like grazing for us is like the number one key. So I think a lot of people, probably producers, your clients, should be trained up in that area of grazing, of the benefits of rotational grazing and focusing on pastures, because that's really where you can get a lot of upside in soil carbon sequestration, as well as on-farm tree planting and so on. But I would suggest start with pastures and productivity.
And then what do you say, because I guess could be the tendency maybe for some people just to wait and think, we won't do anything because we don't want to be in the position you're in, where you're sort of too far ahead and missing out on the game. Like, what do you say to that kind of question?
So I would say that we've seen the benefits of doing it without a carbon market. So I'd say there's definitely benefits in going down that way of farming regardless, because productivity, you're obviously going to get productivity gains and profitability outcomes as a result in your business, and you'll see that a lot quicker than you would signing up to a carbon project anyway. And there's no downside to focusing on improving the sustainability of your soils, plants and farm businesses.
Yeah, awesome. Cam?
Yeah, a couple of comments. One, just to follow on from Olivia. If we talk about these ERF projects or these emission reduction fund projects, the one that the government set up was specifically designed to get people to change practice. Okay, so sometimes we lament it that, I started this beforehand and I don't qualify for a project anymore because I've already done it before I registered my project. The scheme was actually designed to get people to change. What's missing is the people that have started beforehand but are still accumulating carbon in some of their practices. So whether it's you planted trees 10 years ago and they're still accumulating carbon, whether you've changed your grazing and you'll get 15, 20 years benefit before you hit that next soil sealing or whatever it might be. We don't have a scheme for them that's credible at the moment. So we've got a whole lot of cowboys out there making up their own measurements and doing their own thing and promising and selling these sort of things in what's called the voluntary market. So that's, I think, a concern and a risk at the moment, that there's only one scheme and it's quite limited, what you call the rolled gold sort of scheme. But what I wanted to pick up on as far as what I see as a risk is that the goalposts keep changing from the calculations. When I started doing this stuff, and up until 2014-15, what's called the global warming potential, or the comparison of what methane is to carbon dioxide, was rated at 21:1. So that meant that if you produce one lot of methane out of an animal, it got multiplied by 21, and it said that's the equivalent of 21 carbon dioxide. It's a bit like using DSE ratings, that's why they put it together. A whole lot of dudes have sat around the table a few times at the IPCC, the International Panel for Climate Change. I call them dudes because I keep making the numbers go up. They changed the global warming potential from 21 to 24 in 2016-17, and they changed it again last year to 28 times. So if you calculated it in 2014-15 to today, they've gone up 30%. Same cow, exactly the same thing on your farm, it's now 30% more warming of the atmosphere. Okay, now you start doing your calculations and start signing up for things and offsets and what you need for your business and so on. If they keep moving the goalposts like that, it's bloody hard to do. When we first calculated our farm at home, we were carbon neutral in 2014-15. So are farms like Mark Witten's farm, Jigsaw Farms, when they did all those calculations, they all sat in that carbon neutral range. We ain't anymore. And that's because people just change the numbers. So the calculators change. So that's a risk that I think is really we need to follow. The second one is that there's been some great work done at a group at UC Davis in California, and they're saying when methane hits the atmosphere, at the moment, all of the global warming potentials are calculated for 100 years. So when they get into the atmosphere, it stays there for 100 years. We do know that methane, when it hits the atmosphere in 12 years, is broken down to 1 carbon dioxide equivalent. So it comes out at 28, we get pinged for 28, we're being multiplied by 28 times for 100 years, when in fact in 12 years' time it's back to 1. And so UC Davis are trying to argue that there's this what's called a biogenic cycle, And in fact, the emissions that we are getting pinged with in the red meat industry are nowhere near what it's actually causing as far as climate and global warming is concerned. The reason why it's been picked up is because of the fracking industry releasing methane as they're opening up new gas and new oil from underground. And so methane's just been chucked in the one box. So I think with those two things going on at the moment, signing yourself up for something like that when the rules could change pretty easily, you just want to be pretty cautious.
I think Olivia wanted to chip in there.
Yeah, if that's okay. The GWP 100 is the, as Cam said, is the recognised measurement for greenhouse gases, and where agriculture's lumped into that. And GWP star is a measurement that has been developed, I think, out of New Zealand, which accounts for the 12-year life cycle of methane versus the cumulative CO2 effect that never goes down. Currently, the IPCC won't consider it, but it's something that Cattle Council, I'm on the board of Cattle Council, it's something that we've been advocating for strongly to look at that, and lobbying government and others about the importance of looking at an alternate measurement system that will more appropriately measure livestock and agriculture. And the other thing I just wanted to talk about quickly was the carbon market and what's happening there. And back in March, you might remember that the government unilaterally made a change, and overnight the carbon market crashed. So that's another risk, I guess, is that lack of control, and another risk in terms of signing up for an ERF project potentially until we see they're currently undergoing a review. So until that review's done, I'll be interested to see the outcomes of that.
Yeah, thank you. And there's a huge amount of R&D going on in this space, as we know. Like MLA, just on their own, are investing a huge amount. And is another risk around the action, the science not keeping up with the action and going too early. I know there's known practices, but there's also a whole lot of stuff in the unknown box. What are your thoughts on that?
Cam, I can go first if you like. There's a hell of a lot of work MLA doing. It's fantastic. They're investing a lot of R&D in this space. I just was also going to let people know that there's a new farmer's handbook that's just been released by AgriFutures in the last week or so. That's called a farmer's handbook to on-farm carbon management. So that's kind of an independent source rather than a carbon aggregator company or someone else wanting to sign someone up, so completely neutral. There's also a new program called Farming for the Future. So that's been launched or about to be launched, that's designed to support producers to evolve their farm businesses in ways that maintain and enhance the natural capital to build resilience and improve profitability. And they'll be looking to provide evidence and practical support for producers, so building nationwide research and evidence in terms of data that will help support these on-farm practices.
Yeah, great. Cam, did you want to comment on that?
Look, I just think it's a product of putting a target out there, which is great, and it's got everybody talking about it and thinking about it, but then if the science isn't up to speed with it, then you leave a vacuum. When you leave a vacuum, people see opportunity, and so there's a whole lot of stuff then going in this space. We will get better at it. We will get better at our animals. I know dairy at the moment are working really hard to get what would be the equivalent of a EBV or ASBV for dairy side of it, because we know not all animals have the same emissions, okay, but we treat them all the same at the moment. The calculation, it's a cow, okay, and we know there's huge variation in that genetically in the way that operates. We'll change our calculations on a whole lot of things. Things like trees, at the moment you have to run a computer model, and for environmental plantings, it tells you how much your trees have captured. We'll get better. We'll fly drones over it and we'll actually measure it, because if a tree that's put on the top of a hill or a tree that's put in a creek line that gets 3 times the water, same tree will grow 3 times as fast. At the moment in the calculators, that tree is a tree, okay, and gets treated exactly the same. So we know as we get down to an individual farm level that we will get better at it,
There's work to be done.
as well as some of the other additives, all the other bits and pieces. So there'll be a cumulative whole lot of things that'll make the job better.
Yeah, great. And I think Murdoch Uni are doing some great stuff in that feed efficiency work in the sheep. Yeah. Okay, so now it's your turn. Enough questions for me. Your chance to get your Kirsty.
Straight off the mark.
Oh, do you want to? The rest of the room can hear better.
Thanks, guys, and thanks for getting up. It's a sweaty, squirmy topic, carbon. We're all not sure what line we're going to hold. My question's for you, Cam, and you might discuss this with Marcus students. So you said we can't sell this twice, but how will people know that perhaps there's dodgy operators out there that are selling carbon twice? Or if I'm going to buy another farm or lease another property, how do I know that it's not locked up already?
Yeah, super question. Simple answer is you don't. Okay, because at the moment there is no, what I'd call, and I keep talking about it as a ledger, there is no ledger where you can follow that through. I think things like blockchain, we've talked about technologies and opportunities before, I think blockchain will become an really important part of how this is done. The only, what I consider credible ledger that we've got at the moment is the Australian government's ACCU program, because every 5 years that's audited, and that scheme actually says this is how much you've got, and it goes on title. Okay, so if you go to buy it and you do your due diligence when you're buying an X block, it'll say on title is this commitment that you have to manage those trees or soil at this level, and if it drops below that, you go to the market and you buy equivalent credits. That's what Olivia mentioned, the way the market went up and then market popped. Market went up because the first people that signed up 5 years earlier, particularly in the soil carbon ones, you project what you think your soil carbon will be in 5 years' time. They predicted that, mainly in Queensland, went through a drought. Guess what? Didn't accumulate as fast as they thought. Had to do a physical measurement of it. Did the physical measurement. They didn't meet their target. Australian government said, well, bad luck. You know, we've paid you to accumulate this much. You've only accumulated this much. Go to the market and buy it. So the market went up like that. ACCUs that people hadn't sold to the government but were registered went up like that. And then when they saw where the market was going and how speculative this was becoming, Angus Taylor said, oh, no, it's all right. If you've got a contract, you can just wash it out. Used to be that you were locked in. He said, no, if you've had it for 2 years, just wash it out the same price as you bought it from. So this spot market, all of a sudden, everybody said, oh, geez, I'll wash it out rather than pay $100 for an ACCU. I'll wash it out at $12. And the market overnight just went like that, just collapsed. You know, so there's bloody big risks in this, even when you sign up with all of the paperwork and all the other stuff that you think is credible. Now, the government one's the only one that goes on title. All these other 100-odd brokers, 123 there are now, that Olivia was talking about, anybody can put their shingle up and become a broker in that sort of space and do that sort of stuff. Those aren't registered on title, so you have no knowledge, unless it's disclosed to you, that might have been sold beforehand and you have a liability to someone else to do it.
Great. Any other questions? Yep, up the back, Matt.
Mac MacArthur. Could I just ask Jess, I've read recently an article in The Australian that said that in Holland, farmers were being told to get rid of the cows, reduce their numbers of cattle in a major way. And I see a situation really in Australia where our grass-fed cattle industry is at great risk of us getting things like that put on our meat products particularly, but any products that we're producing. What are the answers to preventing Australia being told by Europe and some of our European markets that we've got to reduce our methane and carbon and reduce the cattle numbers?
So thank you for that news. I wasn't aware that was happening in Holland. I suppose the position that Australia sort of sits in, firstly from our own government, is that while there is definitely an appetite and incentive to, reduce emissions across all industries and reduce the footprint of all industries, agriculture's not the worst one up there. So we have other things to focus on from our national footprint perspective. In terms of the position that Australia can hold from a marketplace, while there's still a strong demand for red meat, Australia has a real actual opportunity to offer, a different product to market in terms of, particularly a lot of what we play in is the natural beef sector, and being able to wrap up, our sustainability claims and demonstrate, how we are looking after the environment and maintaining or improving the land that cattle are on, offers actually quite a unique story in the marketplace. So in terms of how individual countries act or the policy they set, that really often is determined, like in the case of New Zealand, by what that breakup is of different industries and how much pressure needs to be put on agriculture to reduce the nation's footprint and any commitments they may have made at any of the climate summits. So we're not going to see, I don't think, in the short term at least, the same policy pressure in Australia for that reason. But it is, to me, a real opportunity for us to say, well, actually, we are pretty proud of the job we're doing, so let's fill that market space. Super important, though, that we have some data and numbers and evidence to back that up. Otherwise, it'll be perceived as greenwashing, or, if we're marking up our product and we can't back that up with claims, that consumers very quickly lose trust in that and will stop paying the premiums for the product. So from our perspective, we get asked regularly, what is the carbon footprint of your supply chain? Or how does your product compare to US beef or another country's beef? And right now the answer is, well, here's the national emissions intensity and I don't know. So we've been working with our supply chain to start getting some initial numbers with farms, just funding some initial carbon workshops, getting some de-identified numbers so we can start building a sort of dummy footprint for our supply chain. I guess the biggest thing that we've identified through that period, though, is just, again, that complete lack of understanding or people just not knowing where to start and having so much confusion. So a lot of our emphasis at this point is just helping to educate people in this space, and we've been working with Pinion and MLA on getting simple resources to farmers so they can start demystifying carbon and start finding really simple, practical ways to understand their footprint. Because if we don't have any numbers, no matter how much confidence we have of doing a good job, we can't communicate that. And I think it's really important to maintain that market, that we have those numbers and we can take then a proactive stance and say, well, actually, no, here is the numbers, here's what we're doing, and remove that negative perception of the impact of our industry.
Awesome, thanks, Jess. I think Cam wanted to respond to that as well.
Yeah, just a very quick comment, Mac. It's happening everywhere. I've got a project at the moment with Nicon over in Europe. They're buying barley, malt barley, from a maltster in Geelong. They want to see the emissions intensity from some of the farms that they're buying their barley from. And unless we show that, then they don't want to buy from them anymore. So it's happening everywhere. But I think what's safe about it is they're asking for emissions intensity. They're not asking for emissions neutrality. Now, emissions intensity is just how much emissions are you producing for the product you're producing. And I think we can all do that, and we all have levers that we can pull to do that more efficiently. So we can show that we're going in the right direction and keep that market open, if you like, while all this is sort of washing through and we actually understand at the end what's important.
Awesome. Thanks, Cam and Jess. Penny.
I'm not exactly sure who this question will be for. You've probably all got a different lens on it. Do you think there's a risk that by the time we've all grasped this carbon neutrality story and pathway, the next thing will be happening? So, like in the US, there's already... carbon is still very much part of it, but we're talking more sustainability credentials, which includes water, biodiversity, all sorts of stuff. Kellogg, like the big Kellogg in the US, big dairy companies, even Treasury Wines here in Australia is putting majority of their producers through programs, and carbon is part of it, but it's a whole sustainability picture that is way beyond what we're even sort of discussing here. Is there a risk that we're already behind before we've even started?
That's a really good question. I'll start if you like, seeing I've got the microphone. Definitely things are moving quickly. The nature positive terminology has been bandied around recently, which encompasses all those things. Natural capital is common now amongst investors and superannuation funds, what the shareholders are demanding as part of their ESG. So I think the short answer is yes. That will definitely be an emerging a part of not just decarbonising the economy, but also looking at all those other parts which Jess alluded to too, in what their customers are demanding. Yep.
So I suppose both at an industry and supply chain level, we've got the beef sustainability framework for one, and that does look at far more than a carbon footprint. It's looking at all of those different things that our markets and our stakeholders have told us matter to them, and that we've set goals as an industry and are reporting on progress against that. In terms of what our supply chain's doing, we've taken that sustainability framework and said, okay, well, how do we actually translate this into an on-farm standard and incorporate anything our customers are specifically asking us, trying to respond to that in a science-backed way that is actually delivering, better productivity and things on farms. So rarely in a conversation with a customer or with our producers are we talking just carbon. There are certainly markets, and Japan was one I mentioned before, where that is more of the focus of the conversation because it's being driven less by consumer desire and more around a carbon policy. But in most markets, the conversation is far more diverse, and carbon is more just the proof point for them that there is actually a beneficial climate impact for the whole thing. But yeah, it's certainly not the only thing that we're looking at or talking to our supply chain. And I guess by starting or having a look at a carbon footprint, most of these other things you start to improve at the same time as you improve your carbon footprint, right? We spoke to those welfare and health examples, by planting trees, you're also helping your tree cover, your biodiversity, all these sorts of things. So they are so interrelated, and it is pretty hard to ever look at just that one item in isolation in a farming business anyway, because it is so much more complex.
Thank you. Cam, did you want to make a final comment?
Very quickly, the carbon won't go away because you think of the momentum it's got around the world. It's not going to go away. Things are just going to be added to it. So I've been talking about biodiversity, but there'll be things around animal welfare, particularly pain relief and stuff like that, which I can see will become practice. There'll be practice about workers on farm and health and safety sort of stuff. I can just see it'll be layered on top of it. But that's the way the market is, and that's what we're going to be working in, so let's get on with it.
Exciting times. All right, we've run out of time for questions.
Can I just ask one question?
Okay, Keely.
Thank you. Well, the first thing is that there's also a sheep sustainability framework, so that's a good thing. The second is you mentioned something about resources for producers, easy resources. Can you elaborate on what possibly might be coming?
Is this a question for me?
It's a question for both Leanne and Jess, yes.
She knows the answer to that. So Greenham have been working with MLA and Pinion Advisory on developing a series of e-learning modules for farmers. So we've gone grass-fed beef and sheep. Leanne nodding at me. I often have tunnel vision on the beef stuff, but it is more comprehensive. So that's broken into 4 modules. The first being really what we call sort of a carbon 101. So what is this? What does it mean for me? I'm hearing all this talk. Practically, what does this mean on my farm? And really, what can I start to look at? Then going through to really helping producers take what is quite a complex tool in the SBGAF, so the sheep and beef greenhouse emissions calculator, and actually self-serve in there. So start to look at, okay, well, how do I function this complex beast and what data do I need, and work them through the process of doing that through to sort of actually then translating that into action of, okay, you've done your calculator, now what might you do about it, what opportunities are there, and try and demystify or explain some of that carbon trading piece. And then it's also incorporating some of those sort of scenario planners and things where producers can actually say, okay, well, if I do this, what might that mean? But really trying to break all of this very complex discussion back into some simple tools and guidance just to give people a bit of a starting point, which is what we felt was missing the most. We couldn't just go and say, okay, now complete a carbon calculator, because that typically required engaging a consultant, which came with a cost, and they were still often scratching their heads at the end of the day, not quite sure how they got there or where to go next. So trying to fill that initial learning gap.
Yeah, and I think Cam might have some things in the pipeline too. Did you that you want to mention? Or Olivia?
I could just quickly also add the MLA Environmental Credentials platform is hugely exciting, I see, from a producer point of view, where it's going to actually provide a report card of what you're doing on farm. The other thing I would encourage farmers to do is do an on-farm emissions intensity audit of some kind, and there's different tools available. I think MLA do have one on their website, the MLA platform accounting, blah, blah. Yeah, sorry, it's a bit vague.
No, I don't have
Yeah,
anything more to
okay,
add
and
after
then
that.
the other one is MLA have just started the Edge package, which is fairly northern focused, but except for Business Edge, which is delivered in the south, so sort of the northern's equivalent of PGS. There's actually a Carbon Edge package project that's just started up, so that will be late next year, hopefully, and there will be a 1.5 day face-to-face workshop. So, yeah, MLA, super excited to start the ball rolling on that one. Have I missed anything, Keely?
No, I think that's everything. Thanks, guys.
Great. All right. So just to our panel, just like 30 seconds each for your key top take home. Like, what should people leave the room? What thought should people leave the room with?
Having a total mental blank. I guess just start by knowing your numbers, and you can say it over and over, but you really, you need to measure something to know where to start. And right now, from a supply chain perspective in the carbon space, that's the biggest thing, is where are we actually at? Because until we know that, we really can't identify those opportunities. But then also, I think the others have touched on it really well, but don't be afraid to make changes in this space because of any fear that, they're missing out on markets or anything else, because, the productivity benefits and the other business sustainability benefits really do tend to outweigh any ultimate value that may be seen in a carbon market, particularly when, we don't know quite where that's all going, and we've got to think about, our own business's footprint, our own supply chain, our own industry.
Although I may have sounded sceptical and cautious about diving into a carbon project, obviously, as Jess alluded to then as well, the productivity upsides are definitely worthwhile. The other thing is technology is moving really quickly. So there's, at the moment, to get into a project, it's relatively inaccessible for most people in terms of cost to do your soil cores for your initial project. However, there's new technologies coming into play, like downforce, which will be satellite technology, and I know SIBO Labs have done a whole lot of work as well in that space. So while I might have sounded perhaps a little bit sceptical, watch this space. I'm not saying that no one should do it. Things are changing quickly, and it's just keep an eye on everything.
What Jess said, I reckon, was that emissions intensity thing, because we can do it now and we can do it to an international standard. So, and the tools are there, all that stuff's there to be able to calculate what your emissions are. And if you can do emissions intensity, then it's safe. Okay, and you can do it relatively easily. You're not signing up for anything that's risky. It could change over time, apart from the numbers changing a bit, I suppose, possibly. But there's real benefit to an individual to understand where they're at. And at the moment, as Jess said, we don't have that. So we're trying to defend or argue a case where we don't actually know where the hell we're starting from. But we can do that really easily, really quickly now. So that would be my start. That's what I'm doing with all my clients at the moment. Get that first, okay? And once we've got that, at least we're armed with something that we can take the conversation further.
Awesome. That's a great way to finish, because that's something that I think we're all capable of in this room, being with the work that we do. And so hopefully you now understand clearly some of the complexities, but you also understand kind of where to now. So thank you very much to our three panellists.